All right. Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Dr. Edi, and he is going to explain a lot of things to us that we have had questions about, listened to hundreds of near-death experiences. And he has that 4-book series there on unfolding consciousness. And we're going to get to the bottom of some of this today. So hi, Dr. Edi.
Hello, Peggy. Lovely to meet you, and hello to all your fans and the wonderful audience who will be following us. And I'm sincerely grateful to you for inviting me. It is so important for sincere and dedicated souls to share the wisdom and experience that we all have and can learn from.
Yes. How did you get into studying this?
Right. Well, let me explain my background. Love has no limits, so to speak. So whatever you're drawn to, you will start engaging with. I was born in Bombay in India and manufactured in England, if I can put it that way. So the Eastern raw material and the West was the putting together. So I'm very happy in both worlds. And I've been able to draw from both the Eastern and the Western wisdom. Science and engineering was my profession, and equally was music and a tremendous interest in the esoteric sciences through the Theosophical Society. Now, people say, how does science and engineering marry with consciousness? Well, very early on, I realized that the laws of physical nature, electricity, light, mechanics, magnetism, are really expressions of laws at a higher level. So there is no dichotomy, there's no conflict between physical science and the higher sciences, so to speak. If I can quickly introduce the word esoteric, esoteric just means studying the noumena, meaning the causes behind the phenomena. The phenomena are the physical laws. The noumena, the causes, are part of the esoteric sciences that deal with the invisible influences, the invisible causes behind what we see in the visible world. So having studied science and engineering and worked in all kinds of industries, I have always been drawn to transcending the physical sciences, not jettisoning them, and discovering or trying to discover their origin, which, for want of a better term, is consciousness. And now you're going to ask me how to define consciousness, aren't you?
Well, wherever you want to go, I'm absorbing.
Yeah. Well, it is quite natural to ask how do you define consciousness, but when you define anything, there are at least 2 other terms that are involved in the definition. So you can only define distance in terms of speed and time. You can only define electrical voltage in terms of current and resistance. So if you want to define resistance, you have to bring in voltage. If you want to define current, you have to bring in resistance. So it's a closed loop. A definition never tells you about the deep meaning of something other than by relating it to something else. But can we define everything? Let me put it this way. Where are you speaking from, Peggy? Where in the United States? Where are you speaking from?
I'm in Ohio.
Right, you're in Ohio. Now, I'm going to invite you on a journey from Ohio to where I live in Godalming in England. And Godalming is in Surrey, and our most famous person in Godalming was Jack Phillips, who was the valiant, brave radio operator on the Titanic, whose bravery to the last few minutes saved many lives. So you're going to take a plane to visit me, and you're going to fly from Ohio and look at the beautiful scenery. And London during the night is a glorious setting. It's really a tapestry of jewelry. Now, can you define your journey is my question. Can you define it? No, you can't. You can experience your journey and you can describe your experience. But a description is not a definition. You can describe it in words, and a description is only the map. It's never the territory. So you can't define consciousness, you experience it, because consciousness is a journey. It's an individual journey and it's a complete journey. So having said that, now, the thing with definitions is we can define objects. We can talk about, for example, here is a paperweight I got from Australia. It's an object. You can put an object in a box. You can't put a rainbow in a box. Why? Because a rainbow is not an object. It's a phenomenon. It's a phenomenon created by the laws of refraction of light and the optical apparatus and all the rest of it. So if I go up in a balloon, I can't touch a rainbow. I only touch water droplets. So a phenomena, you can look at consciousness as a phenomena. It's not an objective thing. But if we must try and define it, let's think very simply of Einstein's E equals mc squared, the conversion of matter and energy. Matter expresses as energy. You haven't got energy like a gas inside matter. Energy, when it's frozen, so to speak, bottled up, expresses as matter. In fact, the great scientist James Jeans referred to matter as bottled up energy or bottled up waves. So energy does not express in matter, it expresses as matter, frozen energy, so to speak. Now, if we just take that E equals mc squared up to the highest level, we can regard consciousness as the ultimate energy, the ultimate intelligent energy, which expresses as matter in various stages. So the one energy, the one divine energy, expresses at various levels of itself. So yeah, that's a bit of a mouthful, but I think if one, just resorts to cheap cliches, lower consciousness, this, that, the other, it doesn't really help. So one can look at it in terms of definitions, which you can't. It's a journey, it's a phenomena, and it's the ultimate ground of our being, the ultimate element. Max Planck, the great founder of quantum physics, said, and I almost paraphrasing, I quote, he said, "As a man who has devoted his whole life to the most hard-headed science, I can tell you there is no such thing as matter. All that we call matter is really the activity of force. And behind that force, we must assume a tremendous intelligence. Give it whatever name you like."
Assume a tremendous intelligence, as in control of everything?
Well, control if you like, but as the matrix, as the governing field.
Okay, because that's what we get into with near-death experiences is after you hear so many, you start to realize there is a certain communication on the other side. They say, I was told it's not my time, or I was told it was my time. I was told to go back. I was told, or I was shown this, and I was shown a life review, and all my memories were used to teach me this. And then, these visions appear that explain something that could have been from a memory, or it could have never happened, or it could be something in the future. And so there's this feeling of all these stories that someone is in control of everything and recording everything, and everything matters. And there seems to be a good and bad logic. That's right to do, that's not right to do. And that's about all I know. So if you can explain anything to me.
In control, if you like, Peggy, but not controlling. It's not right. If I put it this way, the laws of physical science are in control of everything that happens in our physical world, but it's not a controlling thing. It's not a personal thing at all. With near-death experiences, what one finds is an incredible consistency amongst all the reports one gets on near-death experiences. And that incredible consistency amongst various cultures, young, middle-aged, old age, all times, that consistency brings up or makes one understand that there is a very considerable body of evidence that can't possibly be rubbished on the basis, you're hallucinating and all that sort of nonsense. And there is no end of scientific evidence, clinical evidence, to show that when all the markers of death you've ticked all the boxes, no ECG, no breathing, no recording of all the other life signals. Despite all of that, when one is revived or one revives, there is perfect recall. And there is tremendous resistance on the part of the scientific community because it doesn't fit their worldview, their paradigm. And their paradigm is matter, physical matter is the primary. Everything that we call life intelligence is the interaction of matter and its products. And so when the matter of the brain dies, that's it. Well, the tragedy, Peggy, is this, that the greatest of scientists have spoken openly about the enlightened worldview, about the parental wisdom, about the transcendence of the human being beyond the body. But the corpus of science, mainstream science, just completely ignores this.
Why do you think that is?
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, all sorts of reasons. Because physical science had spectacular success. And let's go back to the 19th century. The great Schrödinger, in the 20th century, pointed out that in the 19th century, there was an explosion of science and scientific discovery. Wonderful. But material development became an ideology of materialism. So because we can make machines, we are machines. So that's one reason. And the other reason is simply this. I call it the glue of prejudice. it is incredible how some ideas just stick. In cosmology, this idea that Newton preached that the universe was mechanical, like clockwork, which is absolute nonsense, but that's besides the point. We're not talking about cosmology. But in terms of consciousness, Carl Christoph Vogt in the mid-1800s was a very distinguished, famous scientist, and his famous saying has been cast in stone. And his saying is this: the brain secretes thought like the liver secretes bile and the kidneys secrete urine. Well, if we just think of the less vulgar half of the quotation, the liver secretes bile. It doesn't take much thought, Peggy, to understand that we are not just a liver on two legs. There is something behind the liver. There is the gallbladder. There's something behind the gallbladder. There are hormones. So even if the brain secreted thought, even if there is something behind the brain, which we call mind and other things. But this idea that the brain secretes thought, and thought is a productive function of the brain, is so deeply embedded in materialistic science that all the assumptions and errors that come from that assumption really are what we witness now. And the greatest of psychologists, William James, he put it so eloquently. Shall I just develop that? Because that is absolutely central to near-death experiences. It's absolutely central.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you said that, it's like, but the liver can't do surgery on the brain.
No. Yeah, exactly. But these ideas, prejudice sticks more than concrete, really. If you want the biggest glue in the world, get prejudice. That will stick anything. So William James, again in the late 1800s, he pointed out that even in his day, the most popular ideas in psychology are not exactly the most accurate. And in his lectures on human immortality, his Gifford lectures, he said that the popular idea is thought is a function of the brain. Yes, it is. But what kind of function? There are three functions. The popular one is productive function. In other words, the brain produces thought, exactly like Carl Christoph Vogt, the brain secretes thought. The brain produces thought like a kettle produces steam, or a hydroelectric waterfall produces electricity by turning the turbines. There is another function, not productive, but permissive. Permissive means letting go. The crossbow does not produce the arrow. It lets the arrow go. It is a releasing function, like a reducing valve. That's another metaphor. In a pipeline, if you have a reducing valve, the more the valve closes in, the more it restricts the flow. The reducing valve, when it opens, it permits more flow. And we find it's counterintuitive that the most creative states of the brain, and this has been shown clinically, the most creative states are when the brain is at its lowest energy, measuring the oscilloscope and various waveforms. So when one is most creative, the reducing valve has opened. The third function is by far the most important, that's transmissive. So the brain acts as a filter. or if you like, a transducer. The video recorder heads don't create the music, they transduce the music and the pictures from the CD or whatever. And here William James quotes from the great poet Shelley in terms of the transmissive function, that life like a dome of many-colored glass stains the white radiance of eternity. Life, like a dome of many-colored glass, stains the white radiance of eternity. Right. What is the white radiance of eternity in these beautiful poetical terms? It is supreme consciousness, divine consciousness. What is the dome of many-colored glass? That's what gets in the way, our brains. But in the same way as white light is refracted by a prism into many colors, using that metaphor, our brain refracts consciousness into the various streams of mind that we refer to as sorrow and joy and generosity and death and all of that. So the transmissive function is most important. And when one realizes that the permissive transmissive function is really what's behind it all, then the near-death experience becomes perfectly logical. We don't think with our brains, we think through our brains. And there's some glorious examples of the dying statements of great people, like Heisenberg, the great Nobel physicist. Terminal lucidity now is a very interesting subject of increasing scientific inquiry. Why is it that people who've been brain damaged unfortunately through stroke or sorry, but dementia, which is horrible, why is it that their dying moments they're very lucid during those dying moments? They're perfect recall, they're lucid. Now, why? If thought were a function of the brain, how can a degenerating brain result in such lucidity? There is a study going on in hospices in Scotland to look into this. So once we get past the scientific prejudice that matter is the primary and thought is a function of the brain, near-death experiences and many other science paranormal experiences become perfectly logical and obvious.
It seems to me like these near-death experiences, we can remember them decades later and they're just as clear, but most memories aren't like that. And I've come to think that because they're stored in our soul, we weren't in our brain, using our brain during these experiences. We were pure soul, which you say is, you call consciousness. And so same thing with terminal lucidity. Just me, because I know nothing. It makes me think that, well, that's why they have these lucid moments, is because they are speaking from their soul and not from their brain, the diseased brain that can't speak, but they're speaking through their soul.
Right, let's just explore that, speaking through their soul. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying and what you're getting at. Let's think of consciousness in various states of itself, rather like water. Water is H2O, but it can present itself as ice, as water and steam, but it's the same H2O, yeah? So in the course of dying and immediately after, obviously the lower physical consciousness, which is brain and body dependent, that is completely extinguished with the death of the brain and senses. But that is only the lower consciousness. The higher consciousness survives, because the higher consciousness, its roots lie in eternity. And this is where we must understand that man, and for goodness sake, by man, I don't mean gender, male, man, the thinker. Man is a divine being embodied in a terrestrial physical body. As long as one concentrates on the terrestrial physical body and ignores the higher being, well, of course, there's no memory. The higher memory always survives. It is dislodged from the physical brain. And that is why soon after death, there is this life review of the past life in the state known in the Tibetan Book of the Dead as the Bardo Thodol, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. In the Greek philosophy, Hades; in Egyptian, Amanti; in Christianity, Purgatory. The life review process, which is an inside-out experience where one is given the opportunity, whether you like it or not, of experiencing everything you did to others from their point of view. So if you hurt someone else, you're going to feel hurt. So watch out. Now, before your near-death experience, learn the lesson. You don't need a near-death experience to learn the lesson that has been taught by the sages and saints of all cultures, all religions, and all times in their different ways. So we are a unified being, but on earth, we can regard ourselves as the individuality and the personality, persona to sound through. The personality is, of course, mortal and it goes to dust. The individuality, because it derives from the divine source, will then attract new material, which we then call reincarnation, which is a complicated thing, of course.
You say, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I said, Dante's Divine Comedy has a wonderful depiction of that in Purgatorio, Inferno, and Paradiso, the three states of consciousness after death. Purgatorio, rather like the school classroom, where if you didn't make the grade, you are downgraded, with more hard work. If you pass, you move up the grade. Does that sort of make sense in a general way?
You say there's three phases. First is purgatory?
Purgatorio, that's the Bardo state. That's the state immediately after physical death. Purgatorio, Hades, Amenti for the Egyptians, and the most appropriate term, and I wish people would learn a little bit of Sanskrit, the word is Kamaloka. Loka means locality, and Kama meaning desire. It's the time when we come to realize that all that is spiritual is what matters. By spiritual, I mean that which is nothing to do with personal self and personal desires. So as much as you may love and gloat over your 100-room mansion, none of that will figure in the after-death state. What figures is to the extent to which you have been generous and philanthropic and impersonally helping other people. Of course, this isn't saying you don't think of yourself. Of course, you've got to think of yourself, your own house and your own surroundings. But the point I want to emphasize, Peggy, is people who have been through the near-death experience, the litmus test, the acid test, the real litmus test, acid test of a genuine near-death experience is the effect it has on your subsequent life. Just one example, Rajiv Pati, and he's written the book, Dying to Wake Up. And when people talk from their personal experience, it carries far more weight than, hearsay, obviously. Now, Rajiv Pati was the chief anaesthetist at a very distinguished, well-known hospital in Bakersfield. Before his near-death experience, he was extremely ambitious. He had a large mansion, fast cars, and he was pretty arrogant to his patients and bullied his son. Why aren't you more ambitious, and you should be doing this, that. Now, his near-death experience, he describes when near-death and completely unconscious. He describes in detail what the surgeon was doing to his body, and he even describes the joke that the surgeon cracked during the operation. After his experience, he resorted to meditation. He downsized his house, no more fast cars. He was loving to his family, and he realized what real life was about. So you cannot possibly poo-poo these sort of stories coming from top medical people and say, oh, it's all in the brain, because it is life transforming. Another wonderful example, of course, is Ibn Alexander. And you don't need hundreds of examples. One is enough, but they're far more than just one. So the life transforming experience of an NDE proves its genuineness. And of course, there is complete fear of loss of fear of death.
Do you know if they have studied anything about, it seems to me that when people have had an NDE, they have a rapid healing physically when they return. That just boggles the minds of doctors.
A rapid healing physically. Right. I don't know if there have been any studies of that.
Someone dying of leukemia, they have an NDE and they come back, and there's no sign of leukemia or cancer or anything.
Yeah.
Or they're not supposed to walk again, and they do.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Yes.
Like Anita Moorjani.
Sorry? Yeah,
Anita Moorjani.
I don't know of any studies, but the ones who had come through the NDE, you're right, the healing has been almost miraculous. Even Alexander, for example, Rajiv Pati, many others, Jill Bowe Taylor, who wrote the I forget the name of her book. And these are top people who've written about it, and the healing is spontaneous. I can only say because there is a flooding of inner light.
So I thought too.
Yeah, there is an absolute flooding of inner, and it's not always in the NDE situation. There was a famous Nobel scientist, a French scientist, who witnessed how a lady in Lourdes, in the famous place in France, how he witnessed how the cancer on her hands literally fell off under the Holy Spring, and he became very religious then. So these spontaneous occurrences do occur, and you cannot explain them purely in terms of physiology and anatomy. In slightly more sort of philosophical terms, Paul Brunton talks about the oversoul, the connection, and Emerson, the great American, talks about the oversoul, same thing, the connection between the higher self and the physical self. And when the higher self, so to speak, steps in, the material it expresses through is completely transformed by that light. So the healing is very rapid, yes.
It makes me think of the mother that lifts the car off the child, that has superhuman strength.
Yeah, exactly. When all thought of the personal self is held in abeyance because of that tremendous focus, there is an influx of supernal energy. Yeah.
It seems like there should be something asked at triage, or someone comes to the emergency department, you have your standard questions, but if they would ask, have you had a spiritual experience recently? Something that you can't understand or explain, or an out-of-body experience. Just one little short question, because it seems like so many of the NDEers say, I was, flying above the ambulance on the way there, or, I had left my body and, I come back, or, even later after the surgery. And when they have this experience, it seems like it should be an indicator this person is on the line of death here, and it might go unnoticed. And if they knew that, if they knew they were on the line of death by having had an experience, that they might look into, their health. Like me, I had ectopic pregnancy, and the doctor said, you're fine. Well, I just had NDE, so I knew I was about dead. All my physical symptoms were gone now after I come back, but I knew I was about dead here, and he wanted to send me home. And I'm like, I'm not going home, but I couldn't tell him why. And the next morning, he come back in, and I had the biggest total pregnancy ever seen, internal bleeding.
Sorry, the biggest what? Missed that. The next morning?
Yeah, the next morning, my doctor come in and he did an ultrasound, and that's when he saw that I was about dead. They called my whole family in, probably not gonna make it. Like, I had internal bleeding, filling my entire abdominal cavity. And so, but I knew, because the near-death experience, I was about dead. And I wonder, that was in 1986. It makes me wonder how many people today and how many doctors today would be able to communicate something like that and let them know, oh, wait a minute, no, let's not discharge this patient. She was just out of body. She just said she had a heaven experience. She just said she was, floating above the hospital. We need to do some more tests to see if she is on that threshold of death. When all medical science says they're fine, but they've had an experience very recently that, it could be an indicator, but it seems like they're not asking those questions, that patients don't know that they can tell those things, or that they should tell those things, because they may not understand that has any connection either. Oh, wow, that was weird, and not realize you need to tell your doctor because you're about dead. It seems like it should be a medical understanding.
Doctors are so trained that they only ask the questions that are relevant to their training. And here, the story or the allegory of Plato's cave is so relevant. The story where the prisoners in the cave mistook the shadows on the walls for reality. And only when one prisoner went outside the cave, he realized the shadow was really cast by the light from a person on the wall. So every profession is like being in a Plato's cave. You are hidebound by the rules of the game. So it's only when you step outside the confines of your own profession you can ask deeper questions. But with the medical profession, because they are trained in such a way that the brain and body, which is absolutely right, of course, but it's not the whole story. They are entitled to ask those questions, and wonderful they do, but they need to ask deeper questions. And that can only come when the doctor has some kind of experience. It's not something you get out of a book. So I have the greatest respect for the medical profession. My eyes were saved when I was 15 years old by the medical profession. And dare anyone knock them, when we go to the dentist, for goodness sake, would you like your tooth drilled without an anesthetic? Of course not. But can we just explore asking the right question if I give you an example? Every day, whatever the weather in England, which can be pretty stormy as it is today, I like to go running around my local lake, and it's not my lake, it's a fishing lake. And there's a lovely playground where I see, I love to watch the children just having a whale of a time at an age where they have no cares in the world, and an age also when they're not hooked on that ghastly iPhone. Doing that all day, for goodness sake, they're just being natural. Now assume, which is perfectly possible, a child's on a slide and this comes down at too steep an angle and bangs its face and knocks the tooth out. Right, you call the slide manufacturer, and all the slide manufacturer is interested, the questions, how heavy was the child and what angle? Now, the child, as far as he's concerned, say it's a 3-stone child, 42 pounds. It could be a 42-pound child. It could be a 42-pound piece of wood or stone. From the slide manufacturer's point of view, it's the translation of potential energy to kinetic energy and the angle. Those are the right questions. Now, say the child's taken to the dentist, the tooth's been knocked out. The dentist will regard the teeth as an object. It is an object as far as he is concerned. Now, will the dentist say, what's your weight? Are you 3 stone? He's not interested in that. That's the wrong question. But now say when the child grows up and has nightmares and, a horrible dream about that early accident and goes to the psychiatrist. Now, is the psychiatrist interested? What's your weight now? Were you 3 stone? No, not at all. Nor is the psychiatrist interested in the child, in the lady as an object. He or she is interested in the inner being of the person. Tell me your background, what are your feelings and all the sort of things psychiatrists ask. You're not an object, you're a being. So that means that we have to ask the right question for the answer that we're looking for. So when scientists say, how does the brain generate consciousness? They're asking the wrong question. And coming back to what you said, in the emergency department, they're asking not the wrong questions, but limited questions. They have to ask deeper questions. So science in general only looks to the change of the form, not to the animating principle behind the form. And their poetry and mystical literature is so beautiful and supportive. The great Rumi, Jalaluddin Rumi, he had a saying, dying for the sake of life. Dying for the sake of life. So in other words, the form must wither away so that life can express anew. So the oak tree in your garden, the leaves will wither away and die so that the oak tree may bring forth new leaves. Khalil Gibran, well-known his book on the prophet, but so much more besides that. He ends the prophet with life goes in search of life in bodies that seek the grave. So the form, the body, is the expression of consciousness. It's the passive principle. Consciousness is the active principle that seeks new form to express through. And the other Sufi who comes to mind is al-Hakimi. The destination of the physical body is, of course, the grave, but the spiritual body is a heavenly being. And its life is the real life. And this body, he goes on to say, is a bit like a cage, and our soul inside it is the bird in the cage. But the bird comes from heaven and enters the cage there, and it only lives in that cage for the length of a lifetime. But when the cage door is opened, you are free.
So someone that paints a picture, they're not the painter or the paper or the paint. It is actually is, them working in coordination with each other, but the paper and the paint don't think. They're not the creator. They're laying there nothing without the person's ability to have the creative
Exactly.
mind.
That's well put, Peggy. And if I can, it brings to mind the story of the great violinist Jascha Heifetz. When he arrived one day in Tel Aviv, the taxi driver said to him, "Oh, Mr. Heifetz, your violin produces such lovely sounds." And he said, "Really?" The story goes, he took the violin out and tapped it. What about the violinist? And this is the central problem, Peggy, because you can't see consciousness, it doesn't exist, and it's a product of matter. So if the brain produced thought and consciousness, then the strings and wood of a violin produce music without the violinist. And the great neurologist, Sir Francis Walsh, he said openly, and this is what I mean by science ignores what they like to ignore. Sir Francis Walsh, a great neurologist, said how childish it is to conflate, to confuse the instrument with the performer, even though, of course, the performer be dependent on the instrument, but they're not the same thing. And another great friend of mine, Peter Leggett, a fellow of Trinity College, Cambridge, and Vice Chancellor of Surrey University, he put it beautifully. By analogy with the pianist and the piano, if either be deficient, so will be the music. So we need a perfect instrument to play on, but the performer plays on the instrument. He is not the same as the instrument.
When I watch videos of Freddie Mercury performing during Live Aid, and you see what flow he is in, and the audience are in the same flow, and me as just this little, I'm not even comparing myself to Freddie Mercury, but us NDErs, when we share our story, we in a live audience, even though it might be just two people or a room full of people, something happens. This flow and this energy, we're remembering what it's like to hover in the light and have that experience, and we're back there in our memory, in that soul memory, and we're no longer attaching to our mind like, how's my hair, what do I sound like? oh, I'm shy. What are these people thinking? You have totally left that place and you are in this flow state. And everyone there in the room, you can feel they are in that flow state with you. And it is in a whole nother science of itself.
You've touched on something very important, Peggy. I'm delighted to hear this. Firstly, Freddie Mercury was born only a few miles away from where I was in Bombay. I like to call
I
it
named
Bombay.
my cat Freddie Mercury.
Sorry? But that doesn't make me Freddie Mercury. Yeah. But sharing is such an important word. Now, earlier on, we talked about your imagined experience of flying to England. When one experiences, one shares an experience. One never fights over it. We fight over our concepts. Concepts, the maps, mental maps, we fight over concepts. We share experiences. So since you mentioned music, if you think of the orchestra, there's no end of bitchiness, of course, amongst players and that, but the violinist never fights with the trumpeter. They play from different scores, but they realize they are experiencing one music, one conductor, one composer, and I hope one divine source. Even though that music is written differently for their different instruments, they don't bang the trumpet over the violinist's head. But if they never experienced the music and only had concepts from someone else's description, they might argue about it. And experiences we share, concepts we fight over. And this, unfortunately, is the great tragedy of religion. We turned it into a load of theological concepts to argue about instead of understanding the experience of those who have really touched the divine source.
I see that a lot in the comments. Like, I think somebody could study the comments on some of these NDE podcasts, sociology professors or something, because a lot of the very religious people come out and they'll like beat you with their Bible and Jesus is the only way. And they quote you these, Bible verses, which I'm a Christian, I'm not against that, but they use it. They're looking through that lens. Like, this doesn't fit what I know. And then you have some maybe new age people that don't like more Christian near-death experiences, and they're coming at it like, no, there is this, and it's this way, and it's that way. And this person could have been crying, telling their experience on my show, the guest, and they're crying. They're telling this horrible stuff that went on. And then they tell their beautiful experience, and that's all they got out of it. Was their view of the world, and this person doesn't fit, and then this theory doesn't. Prejudice,
their view of the world is living in their Plato's cave. They're mistaking the shadows on the walls for realities. That is really the tragedy of religion and science, which has become its own religion, which we call scientism. The only thing that has any validity is science. But just a couple of things. Firstly, you mentioned Jesus. I mean, my approach is totally universal, and I really mean that. I was born a Zoroastrian, but in the same way as you can't be a linguist if you don't start with one language, you can't learn everything altogether. So from the Zoroastrian religion, I realized that there is complete unity in all the great religions. And Jesus the Christ didn't go to a rabbinical college. He experienced what he taught. The Buddha didn't get a PhD. He had an experience. And what does religion mean? Religare, to bind back. Ligare, ligament, ligature. What are you binding back to? You're binding the personal self to the divine universal self. Now, you can do two things with the ligament. You can imprison yourself and bind yourself in a knot. And this is the unfortunate fundamentalism. Bible says this, no, Quran says that, and all the nonsense. But instead of tying yourself up, you can harness yourself to the divine source. And here the word yoga is similar, because yoga comes from the Sanskrit word yuj, which means yoke. What are you yoking? You're yoking the personal self to its emanating source. So concepts create these problems.
Yeah.
And this is something. Sorry, go on.
Does it seem to you personally, studying consciousness, that and in near-death experiences, whatever, that there is a divide right now in the near-death experience of who is going to own them? It seems to me like science, not the ones that saying that near-death experiences are hogwash, but the scientists that are studying near-death experience, it seems like there's some new age stuff, theories surrounding. We got the science, our near-death experiences all have PhDs and whatever, and then you have the Christian NDEs. And I heard a Catholic priest say on a YouTube not to listen to any NDEs that doesn't have like a doctor's stamp on it, and I'm like, what? And it seems like science is wanting to own the NDE and create a new religion. And then you have religion saying, don't listen to NDEs, they're the devil. But then you have part of Christians that like NDEs that say, okay, I like these NDEs, but I don't like those. And it seems like this almost becoming like Democrat and Republican here in the United States, liberal and conservative.
Yeah,
what side of the wall?
Divide. There is a tremendous divide between, well, besides science and theology and spirituality, even there's a huge divide in science itself. There are enlightened scientists in increasing numbers, and as a result of that, there is always a kickback and a balance. The old guard are really digging their heels in and doing everything possible to show that this is all rubbish, and wasting no amount of money as we speak. Almost the Templeton Foundation, that one of their aims is to try and show how science can corroborate some of the theological statements. I'm putting it very loosely. They have just awarded 20 million, and I mean 20 million, at at a conference in Chicago. Where's Chicago? Illinois, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
On cleverly designed experiments that show that the brain generates consciousness. So there is an absolute kickback, and enlightened scientists, and there are hundreds, and the scientific and medical network is a supreme example of an incredibly enlightened, broad-minded, inquiring, rigorous network of not only scientists, of course, but all people who are earnestly seeking. And in one of our publications called the Galileo Commission, there is a picture of a telescope. Why? When Galileo asked the professors, because he saw things through his telescope, the moons of Jupiter, the professors wouldn't look because their theories did not accord with Galileo. But he said, leave your theories, look through the telescope. So this is what we're saying to scientists. Look through the telescope. Don't just argue about your theories. Theories are fine, but they're just a stepping stone. And there's one more thing, if I may say, about telescopes. Steven Weinberg, one of the most distinguished American cosmologists, the Nobel physicist, he was well known for a rather bleak attitude to life. He said that the sun and the stars tell us no more about divinity than the stones on the ground around you. So next time we sing Handel's Messiah, we don't rise and to the Hallelujah chorus. There's no divinity in the suns and stars. When Galileo invited Monteverdi to look through his telescope, he didn't just see glowing gas. Well, of course he saw that physically, but he wrote his beautiful Vespers. He saw that behind the physical was the divine. That applies to the stars, that applies to us, that applies to everything. That there is something transcendent. We are not knocking the physical. Without the physical, we wouldn't be on Earth. But there is a transcendent element to who and what we are.
Yeah, I mean, because our physical keeps us here on Earth. If our physical no longer
And we
works,
revere it.
we are gone, not dead, just not. It's like getting out of the car and we're somewhere else experiencing another way of being. Did you follow the Bigelow contest last year?
No, I didn't actually. I heard a lot about that, but was it Mishlov?
Yeah, Mishlov won the.
You won the thing. Yeah, that's definitely on the cards, Peggy. Why? Do you want to just come in on that, or?
They're doing another contest. I think the time is up, the deadline for people that was submitting. But so far, honestly, I've been disappointed.
Because?
I don't think there's that much substance in the information. I looked through some, I didn't read it all, but I looked through some of the stuff that was entered, and I'm not seeing anything, I don't want to say scientific or earth-shattering or anything anybody could do anything with.
Right.
I want more. I want more answers than what
but
I'm seeing.
You're a hungry seeker. A lot of people are happy with crumbs. Don't forget that.
I'm not.
But you're an earnest seeker. Yeah.
Yeah, because based on my experiences, I want to know more. And I want to be able to incorporate this into our lives to help, because I believe there's a whole science there that's not discovered because of prejudice.
Absolutely. And you know something, Peggy, this was one of the main thrusts behind the founding of the Theosophical Society in 1875, of course. And a saying by one of the great adepts, which I'll never forget, is between degrading religious superstition and even more degrading brutal scientific materialism, the white dove of truth has hardly room where to put her weary, unwelcome foot. So one of the reasons from the founding of the Theosophical Society is so that the white dove of truth could put her foot down without being strung between brutal materialism and religious superstition. And that was to be done by forging a brotherhood of humanity. So you want more, exactly.
Yeah, even COVID, where's the truth there? We're not allowed to know the truth.
I have followed a fair bit of that. I mean, there's only so much you can follow. And I, from what I can discern, there's been no end of subterfuge and wheels within wheels, and anything that doesn't agree with the status quo, you're a conspiracy theorist, which is complete nonsense. Not that I'm not saying there aren't conspiracy theorists, but you don't just rubbish what you don't agree with and call them a conspiracy theory. In volume 1, I have a diagram called the knowledge filter. That any new discovery is put through a truth filter, a knowledge filter. If it's acceptable, let it go. But even if it's true but unacceptable, it goes in the trash bin. It goes in the bin.
It's not right.
But science is supposed to be based on impartial inquiry. Very, very few scientists live up to that, Pegi. And there is a crucial difference, a vital difference between the scientific researcher and the spiritual searcher. And the difference is this: the scientist researches physical phenomena. Now, say the scientist discovers something new about electricity, say, whether he's a kind scientist or a selfish, brutal person makes no difference. The discovery is there. He gets his prize, his Nobel Prize. With the spiritual searcher, there is nothing to research. It's all there. One has to search it out because it is all there in the transcendent. But the spiritual searcher must transform himself in his searching. So you cannot remain the same person when you're really seeking out the spiritual laws. And this was realized by metaphysically minded scientists like Henry Stapp and John Wheeler at Princeton, who said that the great discoveries of quantum physics is really the crown jewel of science or physics. That gone are the days when one could observe a phenomena behind a detached glass wall. Participation is the new word, because quantum physics has shown that you cannot understand a phenomenon without participating in it. In other words, the consciousness is a part of what you're trying to discover. Physical science researches the dead being. By the dead being, what do I mean? For example, if I want to know my neighbor, know him, if I dragged him into my house and killed him, put him on a weighing scale, measured his body parts, took the measurement and all the rest of it, I would not know my neighbor. I would only know about his body. If I want to know him, I invite him in for a cup of tea. I talk to him. I get to know him by participation. So the vital difference between science and spirituality, and each has its uses, they both have their uses, is the scientist works through detachment, the spiritual seeker works through participation. And the greatest of scientists, Newton and Einstein, supreme example, really said that when they were studying light and gravity, they became what they were studying. Recent example, Barbara McClintock, who got the Nobel Prize for medicine. She openly writes that she was so engaged in her investigation, she almost became what she was looking at. So you are one with your subject, really being in love. When you're completely in love, it's not you and me.
Right.
It's a togetherness. So the greatest of scientists have said this, and I keep emphasizing, Peggy, the tragedy is the corpus of scientists ignores it. Max Planck said, science will never understand the mystery of nature without involving the scientist, because you, the scientist, are part of the mystery you're trying to understand.
Ignorance is bliss.
Ignorance is bliss, yes, and Yes, and as Darwin said, and I heard this in a Royal Society lecture, that Darwin said that our ignorance begets far more confidence than our knowledge. So what we're
Yeah,
ignorant about, we're very confident than what we know. So ignorance can well be bliss. It's a virtual bliss. It's a virtual reality bliss, if I can put it that way.
yeah. I had been a child abuse investigator for years, and I was a therapeutic foster parent, and I had 60 therapeutic foster kids. I was like the top of my field in child protection. We adopted 10 of the children, and wanted to go to
Okay.
law school. And I thought, I'm going to become a juvenile judge. I was going to change the world. Got a knock on the door. It was their children's services in the state where we moved to. I go to law school, that were coming to take my children, my adopted children. And so, I said late, I ended up not going to law school, and, we got our kids taken care of, out of that craziness situation that they had totally misconstrued and heard rumors and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, and 20 some years later, I have to say, I'm glad that happened, because I got the education of a lifetime. I could have never known what I knew, because I had never got the knock on the door. I had never had my kids taken away. I had all the other experience of being an abused child myself, of having had so many foster kids, being a child abuse investigator, adopting all these children. I knew all that side, but until you know what it was like to be on the other side of that door and somebody's come to take your children, do you really know your
Mm.
craft? And I said, I got an education of a lifetime. I could have never gotten law school. I could have never gotten any other way. And
Mm.
so, we're working with the state to try to change some of the child protection laws, because I said you could see things totally different once you are in the other chair. The doctor is now the patient.
The doctor's now the patient. It's almost a life experience of the afterlife where you see things inside out. So
Yeah. My
we are,
5-year-old drowning, it was just 5. I didn't know anything about death other than what, I heard at Sunday school and watching Casper Friendly Ghost. But then when suddenly you're no longer in your body's at the bottom of the pond, and you raise up above the pond and you're hovering. And then I'm flying down the highway doing this stuff, and I'm, doing these things. And then, years later, when I start having these memories of it all, and, my family confirmed, yeah, you did. I was like, did I drown? So they never talked about it. Yeah, you did. And I can tell you who's there. I can tell you where you were sitting, and, these things. And then, at 25, have that NDE, which is totally different. It's like totally up into heaven, and all of that experience. And there's no words. And then how do you incorporate that in your life? And then not only that is, NDErs, they come back often a little psychic. And so you have this ability to know things, like all of a sudden I was like, told my husband, pull over. I got to go in the house. I don't know who lives there. And I rush over and I save a kid drowning on Easter basket grass. I didn't know what was happening. I just knew I had to go to that door. Or, we're at this, reunion, and I'm like, I hear a child crying. Nobody else heard it. And I walked over and I heard a voice say, check in that tall grass. I'm like, there can be nothing in that tall grass. And there's this little toddler drowning. And I point and pick him up. These things just kept happening.
yeah.
We
What
now
you're
have this
talking
other
of,
sense.
Peggy, what you're talking of is the sensitivity of the apparatus. For science, obviously, the sensitivity of the physical apparatus matters. In your case, the sensitivity of the psychophysical apparatus. So, sensitivity is another subject that is really ignored. That some things are just opaque until one refines the psychophysical instrument apparatus. And you've done that. You can sense, so to speak, because of heightened sensitivity when things are happening. So sensitivity is very important in trying to understand all of this.
And I think it's a form of intelligence that's not studied, because I had trouble in school. I had trouble in college. I never really see myself as this very smart person, but then I excel when it comes to noticing someone sad, and nobody else in this whole room will notice that person's sad. And I'll notice this, I'll notice that, and I'll notice and I'm like, didn't you see how ugly they were? And I'm like, no. It's another type of intelligence that they don't tap into when you're in school, when they're testing your reading and your math and athletic abilities. This is never tested to see if you excel.
In fact, you've used just the right word, Peggy, intelligence. And IQ, which is supposed to be intelligence quotient, has nothing to do with intelligence. It's intellect quotients. And intellect is the shadow or the lining of intelligence. Intelligence presents a light. The shadow cast by the light you can call intellect. I'm putting it very loosely. I cannot recommend too highly just 1 minute of a speech that Einstein gave, not a 1 minute speech, the opening 1 minute, to a Jewish seminary in the darkest days of 1943. And if you would kindly give me your email, only if you want to, I can send that audio clip to you.
Okay.
And Einstein starts by saying, ladies and gentlemen, our age is proud of man's intellectual achievement, even though the pride is most often voiced by those who strive the least. But we should be careful never to make intellect our master. The intellect has powerful muscles, but it has no personality. The intellect can only serve, it cannot govern. But then Einstein says, but it is not surprising that this fatal blindness is transmitted from generation to generation. And he goes on to say that the intellectualists are the priests. Einstein using the word priests for the intellectuals, the priests of science. So in these volumes, I go to great lengths to show the importance of intellect, but the greater importance of transcending intellect. We do not knock anything. Everything has its place and context. But if we try and understand the deeper issues of life, and NDE's purely using ratiocination, intellectual arguments, we'll get nowhere. We've got to transcend intellect. Transcendent means go into intuition. And the wonderful 2 volumes that have come out are by Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary, and his later book, The Matter with Things, behind me, where he shows that this left brain, right brain asymmetry, that the left brain is the emissary, the servant. The right brain is the master. But that doesn't mean, like in the old times, we thought that the right brain deals with feeling and intuition, the left brain with logic. No, both hemispheres deal with feeling, emotion, logic. But the vital difference is not what they do, but why they do it and to what end. So McGilchrist says that what the emissary, the left brain, doesn't realize that it can betray the master and in so doing betray itself. So one of the central messages I'd like to get out is take intellect to its limits, but go beyond.
Makes me think of go ahead.
You cannot leave love out of it. The heart is far more important than the head. Love and wisdom are served by the intellect and subserved by the intellect. But love and wisdom come first. Sorry, go on.
Oh, no. It just what you were saying made me think of the saying, out of the mouth of babes.
Yes, cometh forth. Absolutely. It is such a lovely saying.
One
So
day in the room, all the adults and all the older children were all kind of not getting along, and all this little drama was going on. And our youngest adopted son, he was like 6, 7 at the time, he put a wig on his head. Everybody was calm. Everybody no longer cared about their disputes. He put this wig on his head, this little boy, making him look like a girl, and we just all laughed. And it was just this intelligence he had. Like, he knew how to get us all to calm down and stop talking about what we're discussing and disputing. And it was everything was just disappeared. All the anger, and it was just like we were suddenly a family that could sit and enjoy each other and laugh. And he just had that intelligence that he knew, I need to do something here. And it was that simple. Or, for a child to suddenly say, why did grandpa do that? And grandpa's in tears because now he sees what sees through his granddaughter's eyes, how she sees him. And it's not a good thing. Like, why is grandpa hurting grandma? And, and then they're in tears because, oh, my granddaughter's seeing me like that. And it can, and then, they come with intelligence. We're born with this intelligence, this sense of right and wrong, this ability to love. And we get older, like you were saying, like age is, IQ, and that's intelligence, and we are to be revered. But then sometimes, the smallest of children can teach us the most profound things just by being in that truth.
thousands of people are childish. Very few are childlike. Childlike is completely different. That innocence, which is egoless. And when one is egoless, there is no, I'm saying it because I want my prize, or look at me, or I want to grab something. No, it's just the pure truth.
Because, I know you said something earlier about science, and if there's no truth, like some think that doesn't matter. Like the COVID, like it doesn't matter if it's not true. If they're going to gain, if they're going to get money, if they're going to get backing, if they're going to rule the world with this lie, to them, that's going to be our science. We don't care about truth. We don't care about what you're finding out. We don't want nobody to hear it. We're going to stop you from hearing it. The truth doesn't matter. And then I think that should be the, of course, the sole reason for anything we do is to find the truth.
It is frightening how these days truth matters less and less in politics and in science. It is very insidious. If I told lies at my work, I'd be out of my job, rightly so. But when the most powerful politicians can just tell a load of lies, that writing is on the wall. What's it telling you? Truth has got to be primal.
And, I think example too is the trans, our communities wanting to go into the schools and do these strip teases in front of these children. It doesn't matter that the law says if a teacher did that or a parent did that, they would be in jail for sexual exploitation. But the politicians are trying to say this is all good and try to get the kids at a young age decide, do you really think you're a boy or a girl? The truth is between their legs, what they were born. What goes on birth certificate. This is a boy, this is a girl. It's always been that way. It's very simple. It's factual. It's physical science. And then they wanted to say, but what do you feel like? But then they disregard the fact that the surgeries, they're mutilating, they're not regulated, they're not proven that this is a healthy thing, a good thing, even psychologically a good thing. But somebody has decided with an agenda, we are now going to tell this lie, and you all better believe it. And if you say it's not good, we're going to call you names. We're going to block your company. Truth. This is going out the window.
I'm glad you've shown the courage to air this subject. It is rather hideous what is going on now, where the complete focus of attention is just on the physical personality, and you can decide, look, every young child, dresses up in clothes of someone else. It doesn't mean you want to be that person and go through all the surgery. And the Tavistock clinic in London was closed down and heavily criticized for this nonsense. And My standpoint on this, and I'm sticking my neck out, is every young girl should and must grow up. No, let's start with boys. Start with boys. You see why. Every young boy, every young child that's a boy, will grow up to be a gentleman, displaying the wonderful qualities of chivalry, gentlemanliness, and manliness. Every young girl will grow up to be a lady, displaying the qualities of dignity, beauty, and the one thing that, in my opinion, women excel in, the power of love. The power of love. And anything in between is artificial. Call it a hybrid.
Yeah, truth is not allowed, it seems,
Truth is
anymore.
not allowed. Wokery is the ultimate hypocrisy. Oxfam has just issued a 92-page report on inclusive language. You can't even use the word mother. You can't use the word youth. And of course, you can't use the word black. And the stupid mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, when he was mayor, he banned the use of the word black coffee. No, that's offensive. It's got to be coffee without milk. Think of the stupidity. So what do you call a crow? A bird without milk?
A
Closed
cat
wrap.
that's not white, it's not yellow. Keep on guessing because I can't say the word black cat.
Yeah, but what this is showing is the low mentality, consciousness at its lowest vibration.
Yes.
Not seeing the inner person, black, white, pink, green, or blue. Who cares? It's the clothing. So emphasizing the outer and the superficial is really degenerating thought and ethical action. So what do you call a blackbird? A bird without milk. I mean,
And by not being able to
and
say it indicates
black
there's
and
something
white
wrong with it.
photography? What about black and white photography?
Mhm.
No milk and white photography. I mean, it's beyond the joke.
But it's okay to say white,
Yeah,
but not okay to say black. So what does
yeah.
that say to black children? No one can say the name that's always been said to represent your color. Like, is there something wrong with it? I mean, I'm sure they're gonna think,
Nothing.
but
You
you can
should be
say
proud of
white,
it.
but you can't say black. Like, why?
Yeah. But also this racism thing. I mean, we're not going to go into that. But if I go to an Italian restaurant and I criticize Italian food, which I love anyway, I'm not going to be called a racist. If I go to an African restaurant, if one exists, and criticize that, I'm a racist. If I ask you which part of America do you live in, and can you tell me more about the town and the population? Fine. Which part of Africa do you live in? Where's the town? Oh, no, you're a racist. And that was the fate of Prince William's nanny, I believe, when she just asked someone, well, you come from Africa, but where? Just tell me more. Oh, you're a racist. But if that lady came from Spain, well, you can ask those questions. See the stupidity in that.
Mm-hmm. It's
It's
stupid.
just a simple question, and how it is overlaid with one's own conceptual garbage.
In the 90s, I was a student at High University and I wanted to take a Black history class. And the first day of class, I went to the door and all these Black students come and said, you don't belong here. You can't come in here.
Why
I'm
not?
like, they wouldn't let
You're
me
a
go
human
in.
being.
I said, I want to learn about Black history. You should be glad that a white person wants to learn about Black history.
Yeah, celebrate it.
They
Yeah.
wouldn't let me go in there. No, if white students did that, stop any student from coming, Black say you're not allowed in here, it would be a big thing, and it should be a big thing.
Yeah.
But for me, it was, so I dropped the class. I wanted to learn.
Krishnamurti, the great sage, put it so eloquently. You are first and foremost a human being, not your labels. You are a human being. And the more people understand that, we can transform the world simply. The word man, the origin of the word manos, the thinker, refers to the divine spark that's fallen in matter. The word human, who, like humus, is of the earth. So the human being is the divine spark embodied in the body of matter. If people would just understand that, all this rubbish about black, white, pink, green would fall logically by the wayside. Relate to the inner person, not the appearance.
I'm kind of concerned, are you, about the AI stuff, where we're going at with that?
I'm very concerned about AI because it's not so much that machines will be more like humans, but human beings are going to behave more like machines in this increasing mechanization. Now, everything has its uses. I attended a conference at an eye hospital where they were taking photographs of the cornea at split-second intervals, to study some degeneration. And AI is perfect for that because you can't have someone looking at 100,000 photographs. You can have artificial intelligence, an algorithm, scanning those photographs, a wonderful use of AI. But when AI is used for, need I say, as a substitute for human creativity, for weapons of war, and also for cheating, now this new thing, the chatbot, I am hugely concerned about the ramifications of that. But if you think of music, you mentioned Freddie Mercury, if you think of the beautiful music of Chopin, it is full of rubato, the slowing down and speeding up. No AI could possibly emulate the subtle nuances of rubato. It has to come from a human being. You can program it into the algorithm, and that's just stiff programming. The live experience, and you mentioned the Freddie Mercury live experience, no AI can possibly recreate that. But again, it's what you do with AI rather than AI in itself. But I see the misuse as tremendous.
How do you feel about CERN?
Oh, the laboratory in Switzerland. I've written about CERN. The current Large Hadron Collider, the diameter of the tunnel is 27.6 kilometers. I attended a conference, a lecture at the Royal Institution in London, the top institution, where they want to build another Large Hadron Collider, not 27.6 kilometers, but 100 kilometers, at a cost of 20 billion. So just think of the implications of that. To find the ultimate particle. The great Heisenberg said, by trying to get to smaller and smaller units, you do not reach an ultimate particle, but you reach a stage where division has no meaning. Max Planck and Schrödinger also openly said that the real stuff of our world, they called it mind stuff, consciousness. It's not matter. They're still trying to find the ultimate matter. I think it is a tremendous waste of money and a waste of resources, because the magnets, you need to move the particles around and keep them in their orbit. use precious metals, in huge amounts.
Yeah, this just seems like there's so much we could be putting money towards instead
Well,
of
you see,
something like that.
it's fashionable because it's tangible. There's technology involved. There's Nobel Prizes involved, and therefore it goes on the same bandwagon.
We had talked earlier about the billions that was going to go to the spiritual to prove what was it? I had brought up after that Bigelow, and you had talked about
Oh,
the other one.
Templeton, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah, the 20 million.
yeah, that it seems like they're putting money towards that. Do you feel like that's to disprove the
It's
evidence
not.
we're finding in near-death
No,
experiences?
I don't think it's to disprove, but they're really being battered into a corner. They're desperate to prove the brain generates consciousness because their egos, their Nobel Prizes, their positions in university all depend on that. And, it comes from Francis Crick. DNA, Francis Crick, your joys, your sorrows, your griefs are all down to the oscillations of neurons across your neocortex. To which another Nobel laureate, Gerald Edelman, said to reduce the whole of human experience just to the activity of biological matter is just plain silly. But, Crick's verdict obviously is taken off, whereas few people have heard of Edelman. And Crick's proteges, like David Eagleman, talks about your joys, your everything depends on what he calls the neuronal weave. It is just the firing and activity of neurons. And as Ibn Alexander puts it so perfectly in his book, Proof of Heaven, that every look in a child's eyes, every feeling of falling in love, the experience of a sunset, all of that can be put down to the electrochemical flickering of neurons in a 3-pound gelatinous mass. Just shows that neuroscience has not done its homework. And great people are saying this, but the tsunami of materialism is still very strong.
Where do you see the future going in
That's a huge question, Peggy.
humanity?
I think one has to be pessimistic in the short term and optimistic in the long term. I really do believe that scientific hubris and all of that will run its course. And there is a refining element that is sort of evident, and one can almost see the problems and confusions as really the scum being raised to the surface. I'm not putting it very elegantly, but what I do see in science is a bifurcation. There is the enlightened science, and there is the rear guard who are fighting back. So I do see this bifurcation. And with AI misused and technology misused, if I can be as honest as possible, I don't see the next 10 years as being particularly serene. But it is an old Chinese saying, may you live in uncertain times, because it is only through confusion and uncertainty one grows. One meaning the body of humanity, of course. It's only through your own personal confusion, if you deal with it, you achieve clarity.
Where I live, I hear talk of, everybody thinks there's going to be war. There's going to be war. Like,
yeah.
And I think that they're forgetting the side effect of all of this that we've been discussing is society's reaction, this brewing.
yes, the childishness, the selfishness, the egotism, I've got no words to describe it. War is the ultimate failure of the human race. And it stems from me, mine, my bit, my this, my that, rather than a communal sharing.
I mean, we have the country people view, the country music view, the Christian views. And then we have the New York and the California and down south and their views, and they're getting both views are growing in opposite directions. Like they're being pushed, they're pushing each other in opposite direction.
Right.
So I hope that one thing about Facebook, social media, is, and being able, like you and I in different countries being able to talk, is that I hope that the common people can unite.
Yes.
It hasn't been able to happen before during war.
Social media is horribly abused, but like everything, there are two sides, and there are some wonderful messages and inspirational quotes, which are food for the mind. And what we need is mental food and spiritual food. We can't have a healthy body if we eat junk food. I mean, that's obvious. But people don't realize that even more important than physical food is food that goes to the eyes and ears. If you feed your mind on junk food, you be mind. So expose yourself to great music, to great art, to great literature, whatever inspires you.
Yeah, I think you can be aware without being obsessed.
Totally. Because when you're aware, it's a holistic approach. When you're obsessed, you're in your tunnel.
Well, I really appreciate this conversation.
Oh, thank you, Peggy.
Your time.
It's been a real conversation. It's not Q&A by any means. It's interaction, which is wonderful. Thank you, Peggy, so much.
And you want to give a little pitch about your books there? I mean, what will people be finding by reading this? Because, like people like me is like, oh, I don't know what that is.
Yeah. Well, as I said earlier on, the central message is to try and show that we owe everything to science, but the perennial wisdom, the perennial philosophy supplies the deficit. Perennial, if I just quickly describe it, Albert Schweitzer likened perennialism to a tree that always produces the same fruit, but not the same type of fruit. So the apple tree in your garden always produces apples, but every apple's different from the other, meaning that the eternal wisdom has always got to be updated in an idiom to suit the times we live in. Schweitzer said three things are vital for happiness, humanity to survive. Firstly is progress in science and material development. That's obvious. The second one, social cohesion. The third one, by far the most important, progress in spirituality. So volume one it's a panoramic survey. It deals with science in its totality, the triumph of science and the limitations of science, limitations to answer questions in higher realms that it struggles to answer. And the volume one's in two parts, that's section one. The second section is what the perennial philosophy tells us, the philosophy of the Indians, the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Americans, which is ignored, North America and South America, the great modern philosophers like Emerson, and how one can support the other. Volume two is a microscopic look at the human being from all standpoints. And this is where NDEs come in, of course. the reincarnation process described in considerable detail, the unity of all religions, how all great systems have talked about the human being. We're looking microscopically. The third volume is looking through the telescope outwards, relating the human being to the cosmos. Man is a radiation of the universal soul. How do we relate to the cosmos? Man, the measure of all things. And the fourth volume is references, glossary, and bibliography.
Okay.
And the references 106 pages, by the way. So you can find whatever you like. And it's all in color. It has side notes to help everything to help the reader. It has a nice ribbon marker, so you know where you left off. And I've tried to make every chapter self-contained. It has a synopsis and it has a summary which leads on to the next chapter. And the introduction has an abstract of all the chapters. And I believe there's a discount as well of 20%.
Okay.
But I'm my worst salesman, so I'm not on a sales pitch, believe me.
Okay.
The important is the message, not the messenger. But you can't have a parcel without a postman, if I can put it that way.
Okay. So where do you see yourself going now?
Oh, you never stop. I regard life that you've been given a rough diamond or a diamond of any quality. You always work and polish it so that it reflects more and more who you truly are. So at the moment, I'm preparing a fairly major lecture on this whole question of transhumanism and transcendence, this idea that we can achieve immortality with chip implants and the rest of it, and transcendence, showing the spiritual perspective. So constantly working. This whole question of good and evil goes on and on, naturally, but I'm addressing that very much from the standpoint of the perennial philosophy of many ages. So there is always work in progress. And the other work in progress is music. I practice the piano every day, and music is the best. Beethoven said music is the mediator between the spiritual and the sensual. And you only have to listen to great music and play an instrument for all the proof you need.
I've had a piano sit in my house for years. A doctor gave it to our kids. None of them played it. I've never touched it. And I keep saying, I'm going to learn to play that. I still haven't.
Well, it's a labor of love and a love of labor. Both.
My husband's mom said that my husband can play beautifully. And he won't touch it either. He won't show me he can play it. He's no, I don't know how. So maybe we'll learn.
Right.
Well, thank you
Pegi.
so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Just one more thing.
Okay.
There is a saying which one can find for oneself, that the soul of man is a thing whose splendor has no limits, whose growth and splendor has no limits, and the only limits are what we put in ourselves. So don't limit yourself.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Pegi.
Bye.
It's been a great pleasure. And thank you to all the listeners.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm so red. I think I got nervous at some point. I got all red.
Oh, well, that's every pianist gets nervous, Pegi. If you don't get nervous, you shouldn't be playing. Because you don't take it seriously. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Pegi. Well, by the way, when is it going to be aired? I mean,
it should be ready by morning. I'll send it to you as soon as it is published.
You mean tomorrow morning?
I get them out pretty quick.
Oh my goodness, no, I was expecting in a month or something.
No, they're unedited.
Oh, right. much better.
Uh-huh.
Thank you so